The first round of the FCS playoffs did not disappoint. There were 8 fantastic games on the slate, and we got 8 more coming at you this week for round 2. We got the bye teams heading in to facing on the winners of round 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to SlasherU. I'm your host, Christian Rao, here with my co-host, Steve Feck, and we're going to break down a quick recap of every single game happening this last week in round 1 of the FCS playoffs, a quick recap. And obviously, as well, throughout the week, you'll see it on the SlasherU feeds. We will have a preview for every game, all 8 of the games coming at you this weekend for round 2. We'll have a preview for each individual one in your feeds coming in the middle of the week. But Steve, first, before we dig into team after team, how would you enjoy the first round of the FCS playoffs?
It was terrific. And even with some of the games that turned out to be blowouts, there was something that kept you watching each of the games, whether it be an individual performance, maybe a tendency, maybe a way a defense stepped up. I thought it was really just a terrific opening weekend for the FCS tournament. I'm wondering now for the first time too, if some of these seeded teams that got to bye, are they going to potentially be in danger of losing?
Yeah, that's definitely something that can come to mind. Well, you were right for the most part. You did think that the majority of the home teams were going to win. 7 of the 8 home teams did win in this one. The only home team there that did not come around with the victory was Eastern Kentucky with the loss to Gardner-Webb. We'll get to that game in just a minute, but let's start at the top of the bracket here. Furman taking on Elon. Furman winning 31-6 in this one. This was one of the biggest blowouts of the weekend, Steve.
It was, and it was all Furman's defense. I mean, they came out, they said they needed to shut down, the Phoenix's run game, and they did. I mean, Elon did score first. They scored, on a field goal, but after that, it was just all Furman. The defense forced 2 turnovers, 3 punts, on the drives there. Their All-American tight end, I thought, played fantastic, came up with some good clock controlling, game controlling. He had 9 catches, 74 yards. When you look at the final stats, though, it looks more balanced. Like 391 total yards to 315. I thought the total plays and time of possession were also about even when I looked at it real quick. But that Furman defensive line, they kept Elon out of the end zone, even with McKay of Elon really finding a groove in the second half. They just could not, when they got to the red zone, Furman just stiffened up their spines and nothing was going to happen. So a really impressive performance by Furman.
We're going to see Furman take on Incarnate Word on Saturday in round 2 of the playoffs. That should be a really good one. Moving on to the next game here, another pretty big blowout, if you will, large margin of victory here. And that came by Delaware, taking out St. Francis of PA 56-17. Delaware is one of those teams that just makes it in to the playoffs, and they are not taking that for granted. They had a big win over St. Francis, Steve.
Yeah. I mean, this is another game that really was never in doubt. And, we'll just add it to the greatest misses reel here for SlasherU that I've been running up some scores on those greatest misses here a lot, because I said Delaware, they lost their last 2 games, 3 of their last 4. I think they're going to have a hard time shaking that off. I thought that the St. Francis offensive attack, which is pretty dynamic, was just going to do the job and just kind of wear Delaware down. It was not even close. It was 28-3, and they just kept pouring it on. Nolan Henderson threw for 4 TDs. Chandler Harvest had 3 of them. They had 3 blue hen backs rushed for scores, and the pass defense came back. I mean, we used to be number 1 in FCS. They kind of slid a little bit toward the end of the year, but they made a complete recovery, and they just made sure that St. Francis could not get their passing attack going.
What I thought really interesting about this game was, first and foremost, Delaware had 586 yards of total offense,
Yes.
but they lost the turnover margin by a -3. They had 3 turnovers. There was no turnovers for St. Francis, and they still won this game 56-17. That was probably the most interesting thing. Delaware put the hurt on St. Francis. Now they got to go take on South Dakota State. So let's see if they can really make some noise on this one. Obviously, South Dakota State is one of the favorites by a majority of people
Yeah.
in this one. So we'll see if that's the case. Moving on here, we got Fordham losing to New Hampshire. This was a very high scoring game, 94 points total, but the final score 52-42, New Hampshire taking the win here over Fordham, Steve.
Through the first quarter, it seemed as though there was going to be another blowout right out of the gates. They were up 21-7, and then a really quick score they were up 28-7 New Hampshire. But Tim DeMorat, who did struggle a bit in the first quarter, showed why he's one of the best, if not the best, quarterbacks in FCS. He led Fordham back to within a touchdown by halftime. But New Hampshire had a guy named Dylan Laube, who I mean, I've seen the name and the stats and everything. He did like everything. He rushed for 137 yards and 3 touchdowns. He broke the back of Fordham really on an 87-yard touchdown catch. And he also returned kicks for over 120 yards. I mean, it was amazing what this guy was doing. And I don't think I mentioned him. I might have, and we've talked about New Hampshire a little bit. I don't know why I didn't grasp onto him a little more closely, because man, he had an amazing game. And then in a loss, Fordham put up 42 points.
Right.
That's so that's pretty amazing. But you can't be that one-dimensional. And they got burnt by the flame that they lived by all year. That their defense just struggled a lot throughout the season, and New Hampshire at home just took advantage of some of the mistakes, especially in the secondary, and they put a hurting, on them. And the game got close, and that was all DeMorat. I think we're going to see him, if not drafted, we're going to see him in training camp with someone and maybe winning himself a backup job. I mean, he's just terrific. He's older. I mean, he's not quite like my age old, but I mean, it seems as though, because he did play minor league baseball. So I think DeMorat might be like 27 or 28. He might even be older than that. So I don't know that he would be a starting quarterback, and he's not going to build around him. But for a guy to be the second or third stringer, I think he's got a career.
Pretty interesting indeed. New Hampshire's going to take on undefeated Holy Cross on Saturday. That's the early game, noon on ESPN Plus. That should be a very good game. We'll see if that has the makings of a good one like we saw in this one. All right, we have a shutout in this one, and it was an absolute blowout. We had some close games and some blowouts. This was probably the biggest blowout of the weekend. Richmond shutting out Davidson 41-0. Richmond really proved that they are deserving of a playoff spot. Some people thought that they should be one of the teams with a bye. I think they showed that they proved that as well in this one as well, Steve.
Yeah, and for a team that runs a triple option like Davidson, you would think that somewhere in their playbook, they would have had some kind of answer for what the Richmond defense was throwing at them. But they were the leading rushing team in FCS at 350.5 yards a game. They managed only 83 yards in the first half and only 40 more in the second half. Richmond led 27-0 at the half. It could have been much worse, I think. Davidson, to a certain degree, tried to throw the ball more, but they just don't throw the ball. So to fall behind even 27-0 at the half, this game was just destined for failure, unfortunately, for Davidson. They had a good season. They made a nice late season statement for themselves as far as getting and earning that bid. And Reese Udinsky, he literally could have been perfect on the day. He was 25 for 28 in the first half. Okay. 2 of the balls got dropped, and one just barely got tipped, and the receiver couldn't recover in time. But let's not talk offense, Richmond. The Richmond defense. Only allowed 226 total yards.
Wow. Impressive.
Davidson was constantly in second and third down and long, almost on every possession. They just, no matter what they tried, they were not successful. So Richmond, I think Richmond can surprise this coming week. We're going to be doing the previews a little bit later on, but they had a terrific week here. And I think Richmond has a lot of coaches a little bit nervous as we go on.
Well, the coach that might be nervous in this one is Sacramento State, because that's who Richmond has to take on in this one. That's the later game in this Saturday here, 5 o'clock Eastern time on ESPN Plus. That might be the game of the week moving forward. Little teaser on that one. A lot of good games in round 2, but we'll have you covered with the previews here in the middle of the week. Moving on here, North Dakota and Weber State. That was probably the game of the week in round 1, Steve. Weber State coming out with the win, 38-31. This was a battle through and through watching this matchup. North Dakota tried to battle back, 14 points in the fourth quarter, but wasn't enough. They wound up losing this game by 7. What was your thoughts on this one?
Well, when Weber State was up 31-14 at the half, I was wondering, oh, no, not another blowout. But, I mean, North Dakota, they weren't the winningest team in their, in their conference, but, I mean, they played every team tough, and they showed what they were made of. They could have easily perhaps tied the game. Weber State covered an onside kick. Once that happened, I think people were pretty comfortable with the fact that Weber State was going to win that one. Weber State on the ground had a pair of 120-plus yard rushers. Josh Davis had 129 over 21. Damon Bankston had 15 carries and 122 yards. He had, for a team, they had 330 total rushing yards, and I think that was really the difference. I mean, Weber State jumped out early. They were able to control the game. And they proved, I think there was some whispers about, well, maybe they're not really as good as they seem. No, they're as good as they seem.
Yeah, and check out this game. They take on Montana State this coming Saturday. That is going to be another really good matchup as well. We're almost done here with round 1 recap of the FCS playoffs. Man, it was a fantastic outing, and we have the only team to win on the road in this one. That was Gardner-Webb taking the win over Eastern Kentucky, 52-41. You finally get a chance to see Gardner-Webb, and they come out with the win, Steve.
And what lesson learned, you pay attention to all conference leaders, not just teams in the top 15. I mean, you need to give some, love to teams like Gardner-Webb, and they come by its nickname, honestly. The Runnin' Bulldogs ran for 403 yards. That's right, 403 yards. Now, Reed Gaither had 245 yards on 28 carries.
Man,
over 8 yards a carry. And their quarterback, Bailey Fisher, averaged 12.8 yards per carry and had 3 scores. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, let's see if they can do it again. They do take on the tribe of William and Mary in Williamsburg. That is going to be a great battle itself. I don't know. Can Gardner-Webb do it again?
I don't know. We should also mention for Eastern Kentucky that their quarterback, Parker McKinney, threw for 454 yards and 5 touchdowns. So he was not going to let Gardner-Webb just run away with it. But, man, Gardner-Webb really, they impressed the hell out of me. I mean, I had no idea that they were that good. I mean, obviously you give up that many passing yards, you got to be a little bit nervous. But Parker McKinney's a great quarterback. So it's not like you gave it up to like you or I, Christian. I mean, you were a quarterback in high school, so it's not like you went out there and threw for 454 yards this weekend. But Gardner-Webb, man, I don't know that they can win the next round. I mean, I don't know if I'm that sold on them, but my bad, Gardner-Webb fans. I ignored you all season long, and I apologize.
Looking at the second to last game in round 1 here, this was the closest final we had in round 1. Southeast Louisiana beating Idaho 45-42. Idaho with a miraculous season with a couple of great wins. I thought they were going to take this one. Looked like Southeast Louisiana held them off here by just a field goal. Great game in this one, Steve.
Yeah. Well, now technically, Idaho did kick a game-tying 39-yard field goal. The problem is that Southeast Louisiana called timeout literally a split second. They actually had to go and verify that they called for the timeout before the ball was snapped. So when Chavez, the kicker for Idaho, went to kick it a second time, he hooked it left.
Ooh, the true ice.
Yeah, and then I think it's kind of typical, though, of how this roller coaster ride that was the Vandals season kind of played out, especially late. It was a great game. If you were a defensive coordinator for either team, you were popping tubs pretty early. 916 yards in total offense for both sides. And it was evenly matched. I mean, the Raging Cajuns outgained Idaho by 14 yards. Idaho special teams have been just that, special all year. 152 yards in special team play. That says a lot. I mean, it really did. They had a pick six, a 95-yard pick six that put them up 35-31, but Southeast Louisiana came back on the very next possession, played a really tough game. When they had to make big plays, they picked off passes by Idaho's quarterback McCoy, and they just did what had to get done in this game. They lucked out. I mean, honestly, I thought it was going to overtime, and I think if it had gone to overtime, I think the football gods would have allowed Idaho to win this one. But Southeast Louisiana held them off. And I'm drawing a blank as who they play this week. Who do they play this week?
Oh, we're seeing them take on Samford, and that's going to be another really good matchup.
Ooh.
I mean, you look at this round 2 matchup, and there's not really any of them that you can point at and be like, that's going to be a blowout. But, to be honest, we didn't really think that was going to be the case in round 1, though. So I think we're going to have some shocks. We're going to have some close games. Wouldn't be surprised if we have some upsets as well. Finishing out round 1 here, Montana got the win against SEMO. I guess they didn't have to play a coin flip in this one, but Montana gets the win here by 10, and they take the victory 34-24. Montana sneaking into the playoffs after that rough end of the season, especially against Montana State. Well, they prove that they deserve to be in there, winning their first round game. What a fantastic game, but guess what? They got to take on North Dakota State after this one. What's your thoughts about Montana?
Montana, and I know you've been really high on them all year. They just hit a bad patch, sort of like we talked about Delaware earlier. They just hit a bad patch. Montana scored 31 unanswered points over an 11-minute span. And that included a kickoff return for a touchdown and a punt return for a touchdown. So, Montana just took it to SEMO when they really needed to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this might be the end of the road for Montana, but they showed me something. They really showed me something. I believe that this is a very senior-laden team, so there's going to have to maybe be a learning curve next year. They may struggle out of the gate, but you can see that this is a program that knows how to prepare and execute a game plan in big games. The Montana State game put aside, really, they've been in every game all year except for that Montana State game. And tip of the hat, Grizzlies, you did a great job. Southeast Missouri State easily could have put this game away, and you just wouldn't let them. You just came back. Those 2 kick returns for touchdowns were just deflating. You could just see
for sure
the sideline be like, oh, what's next?
I can only imagine. Yeah, that's absolutely insane. Round 2 of FCS Championship is going to be hitting you on Saturday, December 3rd. We're really excited to cover this one. We will have a preview for all 8 games hitting the feeds on SlasherU on the YouTube pages throughout the week. So be sure to tune in to SlasherU. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of them, make sure you hit subscribe and hit that bell as we are dropping new videos on SlasherU every single day. Again, FCS Playoffs Round 2 coming at you this Saturday. Be sure to check it out.